Welcome to the Dr. Anita Show. Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to talk about another heavy-duty topic, but a super important one. So I'm glad that you're here to participate and to learn. And hopefully, if this does apply to you, if this topic, which is the issue of depression in business owners, I hope that you get some information that can help you reach out for help, for assistance in that area. It's a major problem that nobody talks about. And in fact, if you do a Google search on depression in business owners, what'll come up are the few things that I have done about this issue. There's no research on this topic. There's not even a hint of people trying to do research in this topic. And if my experience is at all, relevant, over the past 14 years that I've been coaching primarily business owners and leaders, depression is a major problem, much more than the average population within business owners and leaders. It's a big deal. So we're going to talk about that today. I want you to get your questions ready. If you're watching this on a recording and you're concerned that this might be an issue for you, please reach out for help. Try to get more information. If you want to send me an email, feel free to do that. The caveat, though, of course, I have to give my legal disclaimer to make my attorney happy, which is that this really is for informational and educational purposes alone. I cannot diagnose you. I am not diagnosing you. I urge you to not diagnose yourself. I am going to go through some of the diagnostic criteria for depression in the course of our talk here, but please do not diagnose yourself. People have a tendency to have what they call the medical student syndrome. They look at the list of criteria to diagnose something and they say, oh, I have that. Oh, I have that. Oh, I have that. I must have this disorder. And I want to urge you to not do that. Okay. But if you do reach out and you need some more information, please send me an email with your questions. I can't diagnose you. This is not therapy. I can't provide therapy like this. That's not what it's meant to be for. But I do want to make sure that you are hooked up with someone who's going to help you through a difficult time, because there is help and there is always hope. And that's the take-home message. Last week, we talked about stress, and specifically the dealing with the stress of financial problems, okay, dealing with the stress associated with money issues. Today, what we're going to talk about is an issue that is just as profound, but no one ever talks about. And I was mentioning a couple minutes ago before we started recording that if you do a Google search for depression and business owners, you'll find things that I have talked about and written about on this issue, but really nothing else. There's no scientific research on it. There's no solid numbers to help us understand how prevalent the problem is. No one really knows. I can tell you anecdotally, there's more depression and anxiety as well. We're going to talk about depression specifically, but there's a close relationship with anxiety, just as an FYI. A higher incidence of depression in business owners than there is in the general population. And that's saying something, because just this morning in the newspaper, I saw in our local community here that 20% of our population in our local community is struggling with depression. 20%. That's 1 out of 5 people. That's a huge number. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. I don't know how they came upon those numbers. I suppose there's some truth to it, some validity to that number. But I'll tell you what, the percentage is higher among business owners, entrepreneurs, and leaders, and no one's talking about it. Now, when we talk about mental health issues in business, in the workplace, what you'll see is a ton of data, a ton of research on what the power of mental health problems in employees. So when an employee has a mental health problem, depression or anxiety or even bipolar disorder, something more serious, how much money a business can lose, you'll find numbers pretty easily on the internet about how many billions of dollars are, I don't want to use the term wasted, but that's unrecognized income. I should say it that way for businesses when there's an employee dealing with mental health issues. When you have depression, you're not working at your best, okay? And in fact, you're working way below your best. And that means you're not bringing your best to your job. So you're not contributing in the high enough level to the business as a whole. And so the business as a whole can't do as well, can't make as much money. And so there's lots of research, lots of data out there that quantifies exactly how much money is lost when an employee has mental health problems. There's also a huge push towards what employers can do to help employees who have mental health problems, depression specifically. Lots of information out there about that. You can't trip on the internet without finding information about that, how to do that. But there's nothing out there specifically targeted towards business owners who are dealing with depression. And that's a problem, because when a business owner is depressed, if you as a business owner, you have employees, you have customers, and you have clients that you're trying to serve. And when someone is depressed, it's almost like they have a filter over their eyes, kind of like in the old-fashioned, well, not old-fashioned anymore, the 3D glasses that we put on when we go to the movie theater. And everything that you see when you look out from those 3D glasses looks either red or green or blue, whatever the other color is, I don't even remember. But depression is like that. Depression is like a filter that's over your mental eyes, so to speak. And so everything that you experience in your environment is first being filtered through this depression. And then it goes into your brain, and you perceive everything first through this haze of depression. So nothing looks particularly beneficial. Nothing looks helpful. It's really hard to be uplifting and motivating and energizing for your employees when you're depressed. It's really hard to make good, sound business decisions when you're depressed. We talked last week about the effect of stress and how stress and emotional upset in general bathes your brain in stress chemicals and hormones that actually shut off the ability to access the frontal lobe, the thinking part of your brain. So when you're depressed, you cannot make good decisions. You can't access that thinking part of your brain because you're in such a highly emotional place. I hope that makes sense. So it's a problem. And you can imagine when the business owner, the leader, is not doing well, the leader sets the tone in any organization and at any level. So when a leader doesn't do well, it is impossible for the organization to do well. Now, they might have a degree of success. I'm not saying that they're, going to go out of business tomorrow. It's possible that the business kind of stumbles along and has a certain degree of success just inadvertently because of what they do, just as a really great fit for the marketplace and whatever. What I am telling you is that the business is not thriving and it's not excelling as high as it could go because of the depression that's in the leadership. Okay. So that's how that goes. It suppresses everything. It suppresses advancement. It suppresses growth, and it suppresses innovation. So that's why it's a problem. So it's not that, you're about to go out of business or go bankrupt and people are going to lose their jobs, although that does happen, because think about it. If a business is not thriving, employees' jobs go away. That's a natural consequence of a business struggling, and that does happen. But even in a situation where that doesn't happen, it might be chugging along just fine, but there might be tons of unrecognized potential that's not being met because the owner is depressed. So this is, and I see it over the past 14 years, having worked with a lot of business owners and leaders. I can't believe there's no research on this because it's such a big problem. Now, there's growing research in levels of depression in specific categories of people. So there actually was just a study that was just released, I would say in the past 6 months or so, about mental health problems in attorneys, lawyers specifically, because they actually are now considered the most stressful profession out there, and the profession that has the highest levels of depression and now the highest levels of suicide. Traditionally, dentists have had the highest level of suicide, highest rate, I should say, of suicide among all the professions. Back in the mid-90s at some point is when attorneys took that top spot. So what they're doing now is they're honing in on specific professions and saying, okay, let's see if we can examine mental health problems in specific professions. So it's definitely moving in the right direction. But there's this other vague group of professionals that we call entrepreneurs or business owners. And they don't get captured in the traditional way in research like lawyers do, or dentists, or physicians, or physical therapists, or psychologists. It's harder to define an entrepreneur, and there's a wider range of what an entrepreneur is. And so it's really hard to quantify that, and therefore they are hard to study as a group. But wow, do we need this? I mean, it is a problem. I also am of the opinion, and this is just anecdotally too, that higher levels of depression, it does make people quit. quit their jobs. They're quitting. So they quit their businesses because it's just too hard, it's just too hard. So, okay, it is costing you money to be depressed. It's decreasing your productivity and the productivity of your business. So what do we do about this? Well, the first thing is I want you to understand that there's two kind of ways of understanding depression in general, specifically depression with business owners. One way is the very classic and formal way of understanding depression, and that's the diagnostic category of depressive disorder. And there are very specific criteria that have to be met in order to be diagnosed with depression. And there's different levels of depression. There's mild and moderate and severe depression and unipolar depression, bipolar depression, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of variations of depression. But we're talking about just the kind of run-of-the-mill depression. There are about 12 or 14 different behaviors or criteria that someone looks at, a mental health professional will look at to determine whether or not someone is depressed. So don't diagnose yourself. Please don't. I'm not diagnosing you here. This is not meant for you to go down this checklist and say, oh, I have that, I have that, I have that. I must be depressed. If you're concerned about it, if I go through some of these criteria and you're concerned about it, reach out to a mental health professional. You can call your physician's office. They have great referrals usually for someone in your area. And please go get help. Please go get help. So someone who has diagnosable depression, they may have alteration in sleep. They may have insomnia. They may need to sleep more than normal. Or you might find that you're not sleeping nearly as much. You might wake up in the middle of the night, or you might have a lot of trouble going to sleep at night. So disruptions in sleep on either end of the spectrum, either you're sleeping too much or not enough. Very classic for depression. Another criteria for depression is a fluctuation in your weight that's unintended. So sometimes people who are very depressed end up gaining weight. They don't mean to gain weight. They don't want to gain weight. It just kind of happens. Or sometimes the reverse can happen. They end up losing weight. And again, it's unintended. They're not trying to lose weight. They're not going on a diet. They just happen to lose weight. Usually because sometimes when people are depressed, they don't eat as much. They don't get as much pleasure from eating. So they don't consume as many calories. And that's why they lose weight. So some sort of weight disturbance that's unintended. With depression, there's usually a sensation of a depressed mood. You just feel blue most of the time. You feel depressed. Emotionally, you feel depressed. But believe it or not everyone has that sensation when they're depressed. Men in particular tend to experience irritability, okay, as being depressed. Like they don't necessarily say, oh, I feel depressed or I feel blue, I feel down, but they'll say, I'm more irritable, I'm more cranky, I have a shorter temper, okay? So that can be a sign of depression. And by the way, it has to be a constellation of these criteria, not just one or two. That can be a problem. People who, believe it or not, it's called psychomotor retardation, where people move slower when they're depressed. Okay. They walk slower. Everything they do is just slower. And other people can actually notice that. You have a sense of helplessness sometimes when you're depressed. That means that a sense that you can't really control anything around your world, that everything that's going on is just happening and you don't have any way of controlling it or containing it. You feel helpless. Sometimes people who are depressed move into a sense of hopelessness. Now that's kind of dangerous, honestly, because when you get to the point where you feel like there's no hope, that's where things start to get worrisome, because then you start moving into behaviors that could be self-injurious. And so that's the sort of thing that as a psychologist, as a therapist, we kind of really look for if you've gotten to the point where you feel hopeless. Okay. But also just a sense of you just don't have enjoyment in life anymore. And then the things that you used to do that used to bring you joy, used to bring you satisfaction, enjoyment, a sense of engagement, they just don't bring those things anymore. Okay. So that's another sign of depression. And there's a few more criteria. So you want to look at the whole span of criteria. And if you go to a licensed mental health professional, they'll help you through this. They're experts. They see this all the time. They're going to be the ones who are going to be best to be able to tell you, oh, yes, this really is diagnosable depression, versus, oh, no, this might just be an adjustment disorder or something that's not full-blown depression. Okay. Now, so there's that. And I'll tell you what, in most of the clients that I've seen over the years, they don't necessarily have diagnosable depression. And I am a psychologist by training. I have that entitlement to be able to diagnose someone in that way if I feel like that's required. But because I don't do therapy anymore, I'm not doing full diagnostic examinations anymore. I'm not billing insurance. What I do is coaching. It's not therapy. So I don't diagnose people, but I can't ever take my psychologist hat off. It's always with me. So I'm always looking at people and kind of thinking, well, is this person dealing with something that is out and out depression? And I do tell my clients if I'm worried about it, hey, I think you need to go see a mental health professional about this. But there's a whole group of other people who are what I call flirting with the edge of depression. So they don't have full-blown diagnosable depression necessarily, but they have what I call a reactive depression. And I even use those terms with some of my clients. So it means that they're sliding down a slippery slope, okay? So these are people they've been beaten down by the very nature of growing and running their business. I mean, these people are exhausted and they are borderline depressed. They're irritable. They don't take joy in the business anymore. They're usually just going through the mechanics of it, going through the motions of whatever their business is. It's actually very difficult for them. They still feel committed to it. So they're committed to their business still. It's not about, even being burned out. It's just that doesn't bring them joy. It doesn't bring them excitement anymore. And you can imagine if you're working for someone who is like that, that's tough. That's a tough situation. How are you going to be at your best when the person that you're working for isn't at their best? It's a really difficult dynamic. So business owners struggle with this. And why is that? You might say, if you're not a business owner, you might think, well, what's the big deal? They're making money with other people doing all the work for them. Well, business owners have to figure out how to bring in the paying clients. And that's not an easy thing to do. They also have to worry about making payroll. And that's really scary. If you've ever spoken to a small business owner, they worry all the time. How am I going to make payroll this week? They're worried about signing the checks for their employees. Sometimes they know they're not going to have enough money to do that, and that stresses them out. It's not like they're uncaring people. Imagine that kind of pressure every single week, especially with startups, okay, or companies that are going through a really hard time. They struggle with that. They also struggle with just managing all the time employees. It's hard to get along with people. And when you're the owner or the leader, it's your job to get along with everybody and to try to bring out the best in everyone. And that can be really hard. You're so occupied by all the things that you have to do. And at the same time, you have to get along with your employees. And that puts a lot of pressure on people. And you have to also manage the relationships between your employees. And sometimes they don't get along with each other and there's conflict. That can be an added amount of stress and pressure. So business owners, and there's very few people. It's thankless to be a leader, quite honestly. And as a business owner, there just aren't many people who come and say, "Oh, thank you so much for everything that you're doing." There's not a lot of reward. There's intrinsic reward usually for being a business owner, but not a lot of extrinsic or external rewards. Okay, so there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress. And over time, that really does wear people down. Even if there's some success along the way, even if you're bringing in money, it can still feel very like there's just a lot of weight on people's shoulders who are business owners. In extreme cases, there have actually in the past couple of years been in our community some very high profile cases of business owners who commit suicide because there's so much pressure and they do not see another way out. And they don't reach out for help to try to find other ways out. And so they end up taking the ultimate step. And there's no need to do that. No need whatsoever. I mean, that's bad on so many different levels. I could do a whole series of shows just based on how bad suicide is and how to prevent it and avoid it. But we'll put that to the side, except that I want to let you know that it's not a small matter. It's not something trivial to be talking about depression in business owners. It has real life consequences. Okay. And so it's important enough for you to reach out and get the help that you need. I've also been in this situation a couple of times over the past 14 years where by the time a business owner comes to me, they really are depressed. And they were at the point where it was best for them to sell their business, to get out, because it just was so they felt they were under so many layers of pressure that they couldn't figure out how to get themselves out of it, even after they hired me. Essentially, they hired me like probably a year too late. And, that's a shame, because it's you don't want people to do that. You want them to be in situations where they have built up something really they should be proud of and excited about and can grow, and not feel like they're being pushed out because it's just too hard for them anymore to keep going and to keep getting up every day and to push through the grind. It's just kind of sad. So anyway, there are people who are they have what's a reactive depression. All the stresses that are going on in just getting through day to day weigh so heavily on them that they end up feeling very, very depressed. They lack energy, they lack enthusiasm, and that of course affects their leadership, their ability to lead, their ability to pull the best out of their employees, to go out and get new clients and new customers. I mean, you can imagine if someone's borderline depressed and they're trying to convince you to hire them as to be your consultant for something. I mean, they may not present to you as, oh, I'm depressed, but sometimes you can just pick up a vibe from someone if they're not at their best. You just kind of know that sometimes. So it has a ripple effect, like I said at the beginning of this show. So if anyone has any questions about this, please feel free to either grab a seat here on Blab. I'd love to talk to you in person, or feel free to send me a message in the chat box over there. If you're watching this on video, of course, you won't be able to do that on a recording. But if you're here live, I hope that you do. I know that this is it's a touchy subject. A lot of people don't want to admit that they're struggling or imply that they're struggling or having a tough time. So I know there might be a lot of reasons that you don't necessarily want to ask a question out loud. So I get that. I think if you ask a question by doing the / and then the letter Q before your question, it may go into my question bar and not onto the general chat bar. So that's something that you might be able to try if you have a question but don't necessarily want it to go public. So, okay, I want to open up this conversation. I want you to know, if you're a business owner and you're struggling, that you are at a higher risk for depression. You're very vulnerable for other kinds of mental health, all kinds of mental health problems, actually, not just depression, but certainly anxiety. And we don't want you to go there. We don't want you to get to that point. It's not worth it, and you don't have to. Now, certain people are genetically more predisposed to have problems with mental health issues like depression and anxiety. And if that's in your background and you know that, and you're a business owner, then you actually have a few more points of vulnerability that you'll want to make sure that you have enough support, okay? And there is support out there. Now, you can certainly hire a coach to help you get through this. If you do, please make sure that you hire a coach that has a mental health background. I do. It doesn't have to be me. There are lots of coaches out there who have mental health backgrounds, but more coaches than not don't have any mental health backgrounds at all. And I always wonder, what do they do when they have a client who presents to them with clearly a problem with anxiety or depression, and they don't have the ability to recognize that? What do these coaches do? I don't know what happens. I know when I work with coaches, I want to make sure that I'm going to have someone who's going to be able to recognize things in me. So I wouldn't go to someone and disclose all my personal struggles to someone who doesn't have a mental health background training. So please consider that. If you are struggling and you feel like you need a coach, you don't necessarily need a therapist, make sure you get one who's both. It is a very serious problem. Yes. Yeah. One of the, Hi, Spirit. I guess that's what your Twitter handle is. And it is a very serious problem. Yeah, it is, for a lot of reasons. And it does. Okay. So there's the suicide issue associated with depression, for sure. And it doesn't happen obviously every day of the week, but it does happen. It's something to be concerned about. But also, your business isn't growing because you're depressed. It can't be. Even if it is growing a little bit, it's going to be stunted. It's going to be blunted because you're depressed, And when you're depressed, you're not bringing the best of who you are to your business. And so there's only so far and so fast that you could move, mainly because of depression. So the take-home message here is that there are solutions. There's ways to manage your business that don't end up feeling like you have the weight of the whole world on your shoulders anymore. You can learn how to let go of some of that, delegate for sure, prioritize differently. Maybe, and I'm working with one client actually right now where this is a big part of what we're doing. He's downsizing. I'm specifically recommending to him that he downsize his business, get some fundamental foundational things in place, and then start rebuilding from there. Right now, his business, believe it or not, got to be too big. It's so unwieldy that it was causing so much stress. He's borderline depressed. So it's not working anymore. So it's actually time to constrict, to streamline his business and to move some of these different sections of his business, actually to sell them or to close them altogether and get some foundational things in place and then grow from there in a more targeted way. Sometimes that's what you have to do. But there's always, always, always opportunities for you to get better and to feel better and to actually have demand that your business do for you what you want it to do, instead of feeling like you're being weighed down by your business, because that's how a lot of business owners feel. They feel like their business is this big albatross. Do you do this for free? I'm chatting right now for free. So if you have a question, you can feel free to ask me right there in the chat box. This I'm doing for free, and it's just a talk right now, just to help educate people. My goal with today's show actually is to help start the conversation about depression in business owners, because it's not something that anybody talks about. There's no data about it, no research into it, and I see that it's a big problem. So that's what today's all about. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a question in the chat box. But actually, I only have a couple more minutes left in this show, so if you do have a question, let me know soon. We have about 5 minutes and then we're going to wind down. But because this is really just about getting this conversation started. It's very, very important. It is an extremely serious topic. And I want to make sure, though, that you understand that there are ways that you can get help. And sometimes people, they feel like they're stuck by their business. And you don't have to be. So part of getting better, it might include expanding how you think about your business. And so that might mean that the business doesn't look the way that you think you wanted it to look. So what that means, it can mean a couple of different things. It can mean that you may have to restrict, you may have to start paring down what you're offering in order to make it more manageable for you. It might mean hiring an office manager. Okay, that's one of the first things I do with my small business owner clients who have a physical business for sure. I do a lot of work with people who have virtual businesses too. But if you have a brick and mortar business, one of the very first things that I have most of my clients do is make sure that there's an office manager. When you get to a certain point with a certain number of employees, you should not be directly dealing with all the employees with every single issue. You need to have an office manager doing that to take some of the pressure and stress away from you, so that you focus on leading the business, they focus on managing the business. So there's different things that you can do. And if you do have an office manager and it's still very stressful for you, a couple of things. One is that you might not have the right person as an office manager. You might need another person to help. A second person. So you may have a person who's really very skilled, very competent, but there might just be need for another person, a secondary person as well. Or there might be some just big reorganization that might need to happen. Sometimes business owners can get very strict about how the business is the way it is, and how can I make it how can I have it stay this way and feel better, feel less burdened? And that rarely happens. There's usually some sort of change that needs to happen organizationally in order to help you move forward and help you feel better and feel less depressed and more peaceful, more in control, and more focused on what you need to do. So, sometimes people get caught, and I think people in life, they don't really want anything in their lives to change. They just want to feel better, even though their circumstances don't change. And that's not very realistic. That if you want to change, if you want to feel better, then your circumstances have to change. And that does mean your business. It doesn't mean it has to look dramatically different. It does mean you probably have to make a few key changes or shifts in it in order to help move the process along in a way that makes you less depressed, more peaceful, and more focused, so that you can get moving forward. Okay. Some people do have a very hard time delegating, or they have a manager. Yes. Yeah. So the comment is, some people have trouble delegating, or if they do have a manager, they tend to micromanage that person. Oh, yes. That's a huge problem, actually. And when I come in and I start working with business owners, I usually can see if that's happening. And I'll tell people, you have to let so-and-so do their job. And if you don't trust them to do their job, then you need to find somebody that you can trust. That it comes down to an issue of trust for a lot of people. And business owners, because the business is them, it's something personal to them, they have trouble letting go of many aspects of their business because they feel like they need to manage everything. It's theirs. And because they have managed everything since day one, they have to keep managing everything. And that just makes the situation so much worse over time. Because your business grows, you do less. That's the goal, for sure. All right. Any questions? We're at the half hour past 30 minutes past the hour. That's the best way to say it. So we're going to wind down here in a couple of minutes. But if you have any more questions or comments about this, I'd love to hear them. I'm trying to have less me just chatting on these talks, because that's kind of boring, I think, just to have me talk at you all the time. And since for some reason, nobody is requesting to like sit in the open seat. Maybe people don't want to be on camera. I don't know what's going on. But my assistant Maria actually put in a link if you want to look at previous recordings. Excuse me for taking a sip of water. Please feel free to go to that link at thefreedomprescription.com. The link is right there, and you can look at past shows and learn a lot. Hopefully, that's my goal, is to give you information that helps you get through your week better, get through your day better, and help you learn more about yourself so that you can manage yourself differently and have different outcomes, the ones that you want. So, okay. So hopefully this gets you thinking about depression in business owners, because no one's talking about it, and we need to talk about it. It is a very serious problem. It's an economic problem as well as a mental health problem. Okay. And then, when you have a depressed owner or leader, and that depression is being transmitted downstream to all the people who are working there, all the clients and customers, you can see how that becomes a problem. All right. So we need to talk about this. Mari, no problem. Thank you for coming. She said she's sorry she's late. Definitely watch the video later. I'd appreciate it. So we are going to wind down now. This is the Dr. Anita Show. As always, I hope this was helpful for you. Remember, this is not meant to diagnose. This was here just to give you information for educational purposes. Do not diagnose yourself. Do not diagnose yourself. This is not therapy. I just wanted to give you some baseline information so we can get the conversation started. If you're a business owner, it's really imperative that you get your mental health needs taken care of so that you can move on in your business and make sure that it is thriving, and you can demand from your business what you want it to do for your life. And you're not in a good place to do that when you're depressed or on the verge of depression. So, all right, everyone. It was a joy and a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today. And I will see you next week, because what I'm doing actually is I'm cutting back to once a week. As much as I love doing these shows, what I realized is I either need to do these 5 days a week or just 1 day a week. Actually doing them twice a week was kind of harder to promote, believe it or not, each episode. So I've decided to do this once a week, and then I might even work up to 5 times a week, because why not? Like, if you're going to do it twice a week, may as well do it 5 days a week. So anyway, I'll see you next Monday, February the 29th, and we'll talk about the next topic. In fact, I'm not even sure what the topic is going to be, because I forgot to take a peek at my schedule. So make sure that you go to thefreedomprescription.com and make sure you are on my email list. You get a free 43-page ebook to teach you how to be more productive and less stressed. And also, you'll then be among the first to know what the topics are each week for the shows coming up. So make sure you head on over there and get on my email list, and I will see you next week.